Hey, welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're taking a close look at a situation that's really dominating headlines across Canada and, well, beyond right now. It's the unfolding story of the 2025 wildfire season.
Yeah, and we've gathered up quite a bit of material for this. Recent news reports, those technical briefings straight from government officials. We're going to try and really unpack what's happening.
Exactly. Our goal here is to sort of guide you through all that info.
Yeah.
We want to understand the sheer scale of this season, figure out where the fires are hitting hardest, dig into what conditions are driving all of this.
And look at the outlook for the coming months. And just to be clear, we're sticking strictly to the sources we have in front of us.
Right. We'll also touch on some of the big ripple effects, like that smoke reaching across continents and the important discussions happening about how Canada tackles this kind of crisis. There are even calls for a national service, which we'll get into.
And, right from the start, the data is pretty stark. This year is already shaping up to be one of Canada's worst wildfire seasons on record. It's impacting massive areas and, sending smoke thousands of miles away.
Okay, so let's dive in. What are the sources telling us right now?
Well, let's start with the immediate picture, the numbers. These are from the technical briefings dated June 12th, so pretty current official updates. They report approximately 225 active wildfires burning across the country.
Okay, 225 active fires. That sounds like a lot already. How many of those are, uncontained? What are they calling out of control?
Yeah, a significant number. The reports classify a big chunk as out of control. One source says 121. Another one we looked at noted 116.
So somewhere between 116 and 121 fires just burning freely.
Essentially, yeah. Fires where crews haven't been able to get containment lines around them yet.
Wow. And the total area burned so far this year. How does that stack up?
It's staggering, honestly. We're talking more than 3.7 million hectares consumed. Another source puts it just over 3.5 million hectares.
Either way.
Either way, it's immense.
Can you help us and listeners kind of grasp that scale? How does that compare to, say, past years or maybe something more tangible?
Sure. The material gives us some good comparisons. That area, the 3.7 million hectares, is estimated to be more than 4 times the 10-year average going back to 2015. That average was around 800,000 hectares a year, roughly.
4 times the average.
Yeah. Or, put another way, it's more than 6 times the entire land area of Prince Edward Island.
Good grief. TEI is tiny by comparison then.
It really puts it into perspective, doesn't it? There's another comparison offered too. Over 7.8 million acres burned. That already beats the country's 25-year average total burn, which is about 7.3 million acres.
We've already passed the 25-year average, and it's only June.
Exactly. And that 7.8 million acres figure, it's roughly the size of the state of Maryland.
Maryland. Wow. Okay, so this year is clearly significant. How does it compare specifically to the really bad one recently, 2023? That was the record setter, right?
It was. And what's striking here, the sources report this is the second highest cumulative area burned for this specific time of year. So right now, mid-June, we're second only to how things looked at this exact same point back in 2023.
Okay, second worst so far compared to this point in 2023.
Correct. But, and this is a really key difference highlighted in the briefings, this year's fires kicked off about a month and a half earlier than they did in 2023.
So the implication is?
The implication drawn is that, given this head start, it's actually shaping up to potentially be worse overall by the time the season finally winds down.
Got it. An earlier start makes the current numbers even more concerning. Okay, geographically then, where are these fires concentrated? Where are the real hot spots, according to the reports?
The sources are pretty clear on this. About 76%, 3/4 of the national area burned so far is heavily concentrated in the prairie provinces.
Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba.
Exactly. And the area burned just in those 3 provinces is already significantly higher than their long-term averages. Way higher.
And we're not just talking about lots of small fires, right? There are some truly massive individual ones.
Oh, absolutely. The reports mention multiple active fires right now that are individually greater than 250,000 acres.
250,000 acres.
Each. Yes, and these are burning across 5 different provinces.
Okay, what's the biggest one they mentioned? Is there a single largest fire noted?
Yes. The country's largest fire noted in the material is the Shoe Fire. It's in central Saskatchewan. It's now grown to over 1.2 million acres.
Over 1 million acres from one fire.
Yeah, and it's prompted evacuations in 33 rural communities there.
33 communities evacuated from one fire. Okay, let's maybe run through some other provinces quickly based on the reports. How's Alberta looking?
Alberta has 60 active fires listed in the reports we saw. 5 of those are over 120,000 acres each. The largest one there was apparently started by lightning north of Edmonton. It was over 320,000 acres.
Okay. And Manitoba, you said, is one of the hard-hit prairie provinces.
Right. Manitoba also has 5 fires over that 120,000 acre mark, and they're classified as out of control. The largest single fire in Manitoba is over 740,000 acres.
Huge.
Huge. Though there is a slightly positive note mentioned, increased moisture there recently has apparently helped slow the growth of some of those really big ones. A bit of relief, perhaps.
Okay, some moisture helping. What about Ontario?
Ontario's largest fire mentioned is over 370,000 acres. There are multiple fires noted in the southwest area of the province, and like Manitoba, the reports say wetter conditions have recently helped subdue some of those, thankfully.
Any specific evacuations mentioned there?
Yes, the evacuation for Sandy Lake, Ontario is reported as complete, so people were moved out. Sounds like that situation is stable for now.
Okay. And finally, British Columbia. BC often gets hit hard with wildfires. What do the reports say this year?
Yeah, BC is definitely active. One source we looked at reports 86 active fires there. And that includes 2 massive ones that are out of control. One is way up in far northern BC, nearing 500,000 acres. Another large one is leading to evacuations for rural Indigenous First Nations regions.
And are there impacts closer to populated areas too?
Yes, they specifically mention the Dryden Creek wildfire, which is near Squamish. It's smaller, comparatively, over 55 hectares, but it recently tripled in size because of wind, and that's caused evacuation alerts for nearby residents and forced the evacuation of Alice Lake Provincial Park.
Right, so even smaller fires near communities cause major disruption. It really sounds like a challenging picture across much of the West and the North then.
It really is.
Is there anywhere that sort of contrasts with this trend? Anywhere getting off lighter?
Interestingly, yes. The sources highlight Newfoundland and Labrador. Now, they had a really rough start to the season, quite early, like 64 wildfires by mid-May, incidents in places like Adams Cove and Churchill Falls that were quite devastating.
I remember hearing about those early ones.
Right. But despite that early start, Environment Canada's overall outlook for Newfoundland and Labrador actually predicts an average wildfire season for the province as a whole.
An average season for them. That's quite a contrast to everything happening out west.
It really is a very different picture compared to the prairies or BC right now.
Okay, so we've got the picture of the scale, massive area burned, second only to 2023 at this point, but started earlier, and we know where it's hitting hardest, mainly the prairies and the west. That naturally leads to the question, why? Why is this happening now? What are the conditions creating this situation according to the sources?
Yeah, the sources point to, well, a combination of factors. It's not just one single thing. You had a warm spring generally, but critically it was a dry spring, particularly May and June across those western provinces and also northwestern Ontario. Just very little precipitation.
Right, so plenty of dry fuel building up on the ground.
Exactly, and then you compound that with higher than average temperatures, especially across the west. So you combine low accumulated rainfall on top of conditions that were already dry, add in hotter weather, and you basically create this really volatile situation, perfect for fires to ignite easily and then spread really rapidly.
A perfect storm of conditions, unfortunately.
Okay,
So given these conditions and that early start we talked about, what's the outlook? What are the technical forecasts saying for the rest of the summer?
The overall expectation isn't great, to be honest. The briefing suggests the wildfire season is expected to continue to be challenging. The risk is projected to stay elevated over the coming months across most of western and northern Canada.
Okay. Breaking that down a bit more, is there any short-term relief expected? Any rain coming?
Well, the forecasts do mention that increased rainfall in the latter half of June, so coming up soon could potentially help. It could reduce the risk of new fires igniting. That's definitely a hopeful note mentioned, but the underlying risk likely remains high.
A potential dampening, but not a solution. And looking further ahead into July and August, what's the prediction then?
The forecast is for high fire risk conditions to return in July, and they'll likely persist right through August. Environment and Climate Change Canada's modeling suggests temperatures are going to be about a degree or two above normal across the country right through August.
So continued heat. Where's that higher risk specifically predicted to be concentrated?
In July, the greatest fire danger is specifically expected to be in southern British Columbia. The forecast there is actually for extreme risk.
Extreme risk in southern BC.
Yes, and southwestern BC, which includes Vancouver Island, is anticipated to be hotter and drier than normal as well.
Okay. Anywhere else particularly highlighted for elevated risk in July?
Yes. The Northwest Territories and the Yukon are also expected to face an increased risk in July. And for the rest of this month, June, the northern Canadian prairies remain at high risk.
And then August. Does it shift much?
Looking into August, the anticipation is that the risk will remain mostly the same across those western parts of the country. So BC, the prairies, the territories, still looking at heightened risk.
Right. So it really seems like these challenging conditions are probably here to stay for a while this summer.
That's the projection, yeah.
Okay. Beyond the immediate fires themselves, these events obviously have significant ripple effects. Maybe the most noticeable one for many people, even far away, is the smoke.
Absolutely. And the smoke, it's definitely not just a local issue. It's caused significant air quality problems, not only within Canada, but it has clearly spread south into the U.S. It's impacted the Midwest and the eastern United States quite badly at times.
And we've seen those almost surreal reports of it traveling incredibly far, haven't we?
We have. The sources confirm it's reached Europe and even central parts of Russia. They estimate that's around 6,000 miles away.
6,000 miles.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
It is. And the material describes that visual effect. You get the hazy, sometimes orange or almost milk white skies, and how it changes the appearance of the sun, making it look red or orange. That's because the smoke particles scatter the blue wavelengths of light more, letting the reds and oranges through.
Yeah, those eerie sunsets and hazy days.
Yeah.
Definitely noticeable. But the human impact on the ground, closer to the fires, is obviously huge too. You mentioned evacuations earlier.
Mm-hmm. Thousands of residents, dozens of communities have had to evacuate. It's a massive disruption.
Are there specific examples mentioned in the reports regarding assistance?
Yeah, they note specific requests that came in for federal assistance for those evacuations. They mentioned the Pemmicantic and Mathias-Column Cree Nations in Manitoba, and also Sandy Lake in Ontario, where, as we said, that evacuation is now complete.
Any good news on the evacuation front? People returning home?
Yes, thankfully. There's some positive news mentioned about residents being able to return. About 7,000 people were cleared to go back to La Ronge, Saskatchewan, and 600 returning to Cranberry, Portage, Manitoba. In those areas, some helpful rain and shifting winds have apparently improved the situation enough for people to go home.
That's good to hear, at least some relief for some communities. Now, fighting fires on this scale, Canada's needed help from beyond its borders, hasn't it?
Yes, international aid has definitely been called upon. The sources mention about 500 firefighters currently assisting are from the United States and Australia, plus another dozen Americans are apparently on the way.
And more potentially coming.
It sounds like it. A federal agency is reportedly looking into requesting 100 more firefighters from Costa Rica as well.
So, a real international effort. And supporting all these efforts, both domestic and international, plus protecting property. That comes at a significant cost, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The material we reviewed notes that just the Ministry of Natural Resources invested somewhere between $800 million and $1.4 billion over the last 10 years. And that's specifically for protecting residences, businesses, and critical infrastructure from wildfires. A huge investment already.
Wow. Up to $1.4 billion just on protection over a decade. Okay, so the sheer intensity and this early start to the season, it seems like it's sparking renewed debate, maybe, about how Canada approaches wildfire management at a national level.
It really is. You're seeing groups like the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, the CAFC, renewing their calls for some kind of national service, something to better coordinate the firefighter response across the whole country, because right now it's more province by province.
Okay, so what's their core argument? What are they saying is missing, based on the sources?
Well, the president of the CAFC, Ken McMullen, he argues that firefighters currently lack the same level of, government connection and coordination resources that maybe police or paramedics have. They believe a dedicated federal agency is needed to really effectively manage the national assets.
What kind of assets are we talking about?
They list resources like 5,500 forestry firefighters across the country and around 108 helicopters and water bombers. But they also note they feel this isn't actually enough, that significant investment is needed there too. And the idea is this federal agency could then deploy these assets strategically and efficiently, sending them where they're most needed at any given time.
It sounds like a pretty logical approach on paper, pooling resources nationally, but the material suggests it's facing some hurdles.
Yeah, it seems so. The idea has apparently been presented at various levels of government before, but the challenge, as it's described in one source, is finding a political champion. Finding someone, quote, ready to pick this torch up, end quote, and really push it forward politically.
Right, getting political buy-in is always key. And the CAFC, they believe there are tangible benefits beyond just better firefighting.
Yes, they state pretty clearly that they believe such a service would offer definite economic and security benefits to the country as a whole.
Okay, interesting. So this domestic crisis, it's not only having those international impacts via smoke, but it's actually becoming a topic for international leaders themselves.
Exactly. It's gone global in that sense, too. Wildfires are actually on the agenda for the international leaders meeting at the G7 summit, which is happening in Alberta next week, right in one of the provinces heavily affected.
Huh. Why is this relevant specifically to the G7? I mean, beyond the smoke, why is it a global issue for them?
Well, the sources point out that wildfires affect many countries globally, not just Canada. The threat is very relevant to G7 peers. Think about the fires other member countries face, like the United States. With major fires in places like Los Angeles or fires across Europe, it's framed as a shared problem.
Makes sense. It's not just a Canadian issue. Are there specific initiatives or things being discussed at the G7 related to wildfires?
Yes. One specific item mentioned that's being presented is something called the Kanaski's Wildfire Charter.
Okay, what's that?
It apparently addresses all aspects of wildfires, everything from litigation and prevention through to the response itself and then recovery afterwards. The report says G7 members have already committed to it in principle.
Committed in principle. What's the focus? What are they trying to achieve with it?
The focus, as it's outlined, is on a few key things. Strengthening multilateral efforts, so working together internationally to prevent, fight, and recover from fires. Also, improving equipment interoperability. That basically means making sure firefighting gear and systems like hoses or communication tech can work together across different countries.
So G7 members could support each other more easily if needed.
Exactly. Makes mutual aid much more effective. And finally, enhancing the use of satellite imagery for monitoring fires and coordinating the response.
So using tech more effectively.
Right. As one expert quoted in the sources puts it, wildfires have become a, quote, burning issue, unquote, for these global leaders.
A burning issue. Apt phrasing. Okay, so let's try to wrap up this deep dive then. It seems pretty clear the 2025 Canadian wildfire season is already incredibly significant. We're only in June, and it's the second worst on record for this point in the year, right behind 2023.
Yeah, and crucially, it started about a month and a half earlier than 2023 did. The impacts are heavily concentrated in the prairies, but really affecting much of western and northern Canada.
And sending smoke, as we discussed, literally across continents.
And the outlook, based on those forecasts, remains pretty concerning for the rest of the summer. It's mainly driven by those persistent warm, dry conditions.
And this challenging reality, it's definitely prompting these important discussions we touched on about potentially needing new national strategies for coordination and resources here in Canada.
And it's also elevated the issue to become a topic for international leaders to address together at forums like the G7.
So understanding the scale, the driving factors, the response efforts, it feels really crucial because these events directly affect so many communities. They impact air quality over vast areas, and they really challenge how we manage resources at multiple levels.
Absolutely. And maybe just as a final thought to leave people with, considering the intensity we're seeing and the global reach of these fires, and thinking about these discussions around national coordination, international cooperation, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How might our whole approach need to fundamentally shift, moving away from just reacting to fires towards more proactively managing entire landscapes and, the underlying climate risks on a scale we maybe haven't really grappled with before?
A big question, and definitely something to think about as this challenging season continues to unfold.